Hi, I'm Anthony, and in this video I'm going to demo a prototype of a feature I've gotten requests for several times throughout the years, JSON literals in Visual Basic. VB's had XML literals, the ability to just take a fragment of XML and drop it in your code, since VB 2008, and so understandably some folks say, well, what about JSON? So I've written a prototype of just that to help myself and others figure it out. As with my other prototype demos, there's a disclaimer in the description you should take note of, as well as a link back to the proposal on GitHub where you can find out more and leave your feedback. Later in the video, I'm going to show you how a feature like this could impact the consumption of REST services that accept or return JSON, but first, let's start out with a simple example. So the idea is pretty straightforward. Wouldn't it be awesome if, as a VB coder, I could just go to a website, find an example of some JSON, and then take that example and paste it directly into my code? Well, with this prototype, I can. So first, I'm going to pull up the Wikipedia page for JSON. As you can see here, this is the page, and they have an example. I'm going to grab that example, select it out, and go back to my code, paste it in my document, save it in a variable. Do that and tab it over a couple times, and there we have it. I've just embedded a JSON object directly into my code. As you can see, the type of this expression is JObject, which is defined in Newtonsoft's JSON.NET library, which I have referenced. At the time I recorded this video, this is the most popular API for JSON on .NET, and so I've hard-coded the prototype to use its types. But if you check out the full proposal on GitHub, you can read and discuss ideas for how other libraries could be supported. Of course, the XML support added to VB in 2008 wasn't just the literals themselves, but syntax additions for consuming XML in a concise way. One way to access the elements of a JSON object is to just pass a literal to its default property. There. Fortunately, VB already has a special syntax for accessing hash tables, dictionaries, and other types that have default properties that accept strings like JObject does, called the dictionary access operator, an exclamation point. With this dictionary access operator, you can access members of a JSON object as concisely as if you were using the dot operator to access them. This operator is just syntactic sugar and gets turned into exactly the code that I wrote before with the same performance characteristics. It's just shorter to read and write. And because the result is strongly typed, I can keep accessing members of the JSON.NET API or nested elements the same way. So I could say, instead of first name, give me the address, state, or give me the phone numbers, the first phone number's type. It's a home phone number. I could even do some link if I wanted to filter things out, and say dim numbers equals from in object phone numbers where in type is not home, because I don't want to call people at home. And what is the count of such numbers? Okay, there. I have two phone numbers that are not home phone numbers. And this isn't just VB made to look like JSON, it's actual JSON, so it respects JSON's rules for string escapes. So, for example, if I wanted to take this address and change it from one line and say that it's going to be care of Anthony /in for new line, if I go and I write that value out, as you can see, the resulting value has the new line embedded in it. Of course, the power of XML literals isn't in being able to paste static XML, but to dynamically create XML with embedded expressions, and that would also be the case with JSON literals. While XML uses a special syntax for embedding VB code inside XML, in keeping true to the spirit of what people love about JSON, its terseness, I've implemented this prototype with no special syntax delineating VB expressions as a starting position. So, you just type an expression, and if that expression is valid to appear in that place as JSON, it will be interpreted as JSON, and if it's not, it's evaluated as VB. I'm curious for your feedback on that design. And so what that means is that you can have a value be computed. For example, instead of age here, perhaps this field reads date of birth. And it's one of VB's date literals. Let's go with 12/31/1999, because that's a party day. And if I go down here and I say write the entire object out, you can see now that the date of birth is that date. But the name of the value can be computed, or even the elements of a JSON array or the members of a JSON object can be computed. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So let's imagine that instead of this blob, I want to transmit some summary information about the Visual Basic Runtime library. So let's get a reference to this through reflection. Call it the assembly equals a type that's in the VB runtime. So strings is where all of the VB string library functions are kept. And because I know I'm going to need it later, let's get some info about it from assembly.getName. Alright, so maybe I want that summary to be some JSON. I'm going to put this over here, and I want to give the name, and the version, and the required runtime version. And then maybe the list of resources that the VB runtime uses. And that's going to be a JSON array. And for the elements of it, I'm going to say assembly.getManifest resource names, which just returns a list of strings. And I want to maybe list out the dependencies of the VB runtime. And so now, for that, what I'm actually going to do is write an entire link query from reference in assembly.getReferencedAssemblies. Select new J property. r.name r.version.toString. And it's giving me an error because it says I need to import this library. So there we go. Now I've selected this J property out. And let's actually take a look at this summary information. Ta-da! This was actually a lot cooler when I first came out with this demo. Well, one thing that I've been playing with is whether there should actually be a special syntax for this case when you're selecting out a key value pair. And one idea of that is that instead of having a specialized syntax for creating just a key value pair, making it possible for you to add all of the members of one JSON object into another. And so instead of writing it this way, you could actually write it as this, where I'm creating a new JSON object, and then those members are flattened into the list. And so there you have it. You get the same result without kind of breaking the immersion of the JSON literals feature by calling into a constructor explicitly. I'm curious what you think about that idea as well. For the purpose of this demo, I've enabled it but I am really anxious about feedback. So there you have it, a simple and fun example of the VB-JSON literals prototype. In the next section, I'll show you how the feature might work in a more realistic scenario, consuming RESTful web services. Here I have the documentation for the GitHub Gist API. It's a RESTful API that accepts and returns JSON. The first operation I'm going to try out is just to list all of my gist. So, as you can see, it says just perform an HTTP GET action on the URL /gist to get that list, and it's going to return this list of JSON. So going over to Visual Studio, I'm going to be using HTTP client to communicate with the service, and I have here some code that initializes the HTTP client headers, including my personal access token, which is used for authentication. Now in my project, I've added some extension methods to automatically parse the response as JSON.NET, so let's call that extension method with that particular URL. So dim response equals wait, because all of this is asynchronous, client get JSON async, and the URL I'm going to pass in is /gist, and I'm going to put in this extra parameter here, per page equals 100, because by default the API only returns 30 gist, and I have way more than that, and I want to get a larger set. So I type that, and then just going to console.writeLine the response. So that's a lot of information, actually. No big deal. But maybe instead of that, I want to view a summary of that information. So let's say I just want to get the gist that were public. So actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new JSON object. And maybe instead of all of my gist, what I just want to have is the public gist. And so I'm going to make a new collection, which is a JSON array, and I'm going to say from gist in response, where gist public, let's get those guys out of there and try that out. And still way too much information, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select yet another new JSON object that's just going to give me the description and just description and the URL and the list of files. And let's see what happens there. And all right, cool. That's much better, though I can see that a lot of my files, they don't actually have descriptions, and so just to show off, I'm going to say here it's going to be another computer property. If just description is equal to blank, then what I want you to do is take the gist files, take all the values, get the first one and get me its file name. But if it's not, then just give me, the description, as is written. And so, did I do that right? Yeah. So run that, and there you go. So the description will be properly defaulted. And maybe instead of the public gist, I want to say, get me all the gists that I have updated. And so I'm going to say updated at value of date is greater than gist created at. And so when I run that, you can see these are all of the gists that I have updated more than once. As you can see, the syntax makes for a powerful tool for projecting and transforming JSON data from the wire into a different shape for consumption elsewhere. Now let's look at the effect that the feature has on producing JSON data to send to a web service. Going back to our GitHub documentation, let's look at the docs for creating a gist. So we posted that particular URL, and here's the shape of the data that we need to provide. I think this is where the feature really shines. I can look up the docs for this API and just copy the example directly out of the documentation, paste it back in my code, deleting all this, say dim gist equals put that over there, modify it to my needs, cut out the things that I don't need. So it's not a Ruby file. We're going to say that this is going to be called restdemo.vb. Why not? And for the description, instead of the example they give, I'm going to say it's going to be the name of my application. So my application.info assembly name. I'm going to leave it as public, and for the content, I'm just going to actually read out all the text from this file. So //restdemo.vb, and that's going to be my gist. I'm going to say await client.post JSON async. So, and the URL I'm going to give per the documentation is, again, gist, and the content is the gist that I just created, and dim response equals, so right line response, see what we get back. So run that and see what I get. Okay, so it did something, wasn't truncated, it gave a bunch of information. Alright, now if I go open up on GitHub my list of gists, here I have, and I hit refresh, there goes the REST demo created 17 seconds ago with the content that we just did. Now let's compare that. That's really cool, by the way. But let's compare that, because it's a small example, to the code that I would have to write in the language today without JSON literals. So instead of this, I could say it's a new JObject. Okay, that's cool. And the description would be my.application.info, assembly name. The gist public value is true. The gist files equals a new JSON object. Object. And that object itself contains a mapping from file names, so I would say gist files restdemo.vb equals another new JSON object, and then I would go access that JSON object, or I guess the more efficient way to do that would just be to say that dim file file itself equals new JObject, and then that file content equals io.file.read all text /program restdemo.vb, and then say files equals this file, and all of that to produce the same document. And man, that was a bit of a pain. But you know what? If I'm particularly savvy about the language and I understand the JSON.NET API, I can actually do this all in one go the way that I had it before by using collection initializers. And so now, instead of writing this, I'm going to delete all that and say I'm going to make a new JSON object from, and I'm going to use a collection initializer because I can do that. And then because it's just an add method that takes a pair of things, I can say description comma my.application.info.assembly name, and then another thing here which is public comma true, and then the files, which is fine, but that's another new JObject, but from, because it's going to have some elements in it, but you know, that's not too bad. And then that guy's going to be a rest demo.vb file, and unfortunately that's another JObject from, and we're just going to do that there, and content is going to equal io.file.readAll text from, as we said, // rest.demo.vb. And I think if I got that right, you know, there we get that same blob out. And so I could do all of that and get that. Somehow this feature actually reduces the number of curly braces you need to be productive. Now you could imagine adding alternate dictionary initializer syntax to the language, or talk about serializing object graphs to ameliorate this, but ultimately all of these approaches add a greater burden to the end developer to translate from what they're seeing in the docs to the set of language concepts they need to use that knowledge. That's a tax that grows more expensive and larger the more deeply nested the JSON graph is that you're creating, and JSON literals eliminate that tax entirely. You can write this, or you can write this. How empowering is that? So there you have it. You've seen a demonstration of the JSON literals prototype with a fun and simple example, as well as examples of using the feature to consume a real live REST API, and how having this addition to the language could simplify code that you have to write to get from docs to done when working with JSON-based services. I'd love to get your feedback on this prototype and this idea. Please check out the links in the description below and be sure to share with your fellow developers. Have a great day.